Jack Lemmon confessed it all. In the note he left behind to Walter Matthau. Jack Lemmon was born John Euler Lemmon III on February 8, 1925, in a very unusual place, an elevator at the Newton Wellesley Hospital in Massachusetts. This dramatic entry into the world seemed to foreshadow a life spent in the spotlight, but his early years were rooted in a much more traditional upbringing. His father, John Euler Lemmon Jr., was the president of a successful donut company, and his mother, Mildred Burgess LaRue, was a woman of elegance and social standing. Growing up in the affluent suburbs of Boston, Jack was surrounded by the expectations of a high society life. Yet he often felt like an outsider in his own world. He attended the prestigious Rivers School and later Phillips Andover Academy, where he was known for his quick wit and a charm that seemed to come naturally. However, behind that easy smile, Jack was already beginning to learn the art of the performance, a skill that would define his career but also become the very mask he spoke about in his final note to Walter. As we look back at these formative years, it is important to remember why we are here. Jack was building a perfect image, but as his final note reveals, the pressure to be perfect started much earlier than anyone realized. After graduating from Harvard University in 1947, where he was a standout member of the Hasty Pudding Club, Jack served in the United States Navy as a communications officer. These years in the military provided him with a sense of discipline and a quiet resilience, qualities that would later help him navigate the cutthroat world of Hollywood. After his service, he moved to New York City, working in radio and early television, often struggling to make ends meet while living in cramped apartments. This was the era of the great American dream, and Jack was determined to catch his share of it. He worked as a piano player in bars to pay his rent, and it was during these lean years that he developed the everyman persona that would eventually make him a millionaire. People saw a young man who was hardworking and cheerful, but even then, Jack was keeping his internal anxieties locked away. By the early 1950s, Hollywood began to take notice of the talented young actor from Boston. He made his film debut in 1954 in It Should Happen to You, starring alongside Judy Holliday. From that moment on, his rise was meteoric. He possessed a unique ability to combine comedy with a sense of genuine human struggle, making him instantly relatable to audiences who were recovering from the hardships of the war years. He won his first Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor in 1955 for Mr. Roberts, a role that solidified his status as a top-tier talent. To the public, Jack Lemmon was the man who had it all: a Harvard education, a brilliant career, and an unshakable sense of optimism. But as we will see, this was only the surface. Every standing ovation and every award only added another brick to the wall he was building around his true self. It is easy to watch his old movies and see only the laughter, but we must stay focused on the truth that was hidden for 50 years. The man we saw on the screen was a masterpiece of acting, but the man who wrote that final note to Walter Matthau was someone very different. By the time he met Walter in 1966, Jack was already a master of the public mask, and their meeting would set the stage for a friendship that was as complex as it was famous. As we move into the peak of his career, remember that every smile shared with Walter was also a moment where Jack was deciding what to reveal and what to keep hidden. The note he left behind would eventually strip away all the polish, but in these early years, the legend was just beginning to grow. As the 1960s arrived, Jack's career shifted into a gear that very few actors ever reach. He became the definitive voice of the American middle class, the man who could express the anxieties and the humor of a changing nation. His collaboration with the legendary director Billy Wilder produced some of the greatest films in history, including The Apartment in 1960. In that movie, Jack played a lonely office worker, a role that earned him an Oscar nomination and showcased his ability to blend deep sadness with brilliant comedy. To the world, he was the most relatable man in Hollywood. He was the friend everyone wanted to have a drink with, the neighbor you could always trust. But while his professional life was reaching the clouds, the weight of being Jack Lemmon was starting to take a toll. It was in 1966 that the most significant chapter of his life began. Billy Wilder decided to pair Jack with a rough-around-the-edges actor named Walter Matthau for a film called The Fortune Cookie. Walter was the perfect opposite to Jack. Where Jack was precise, energetic, and polite, Walter was blunt, rumbling, and unapologetically himself. The chemistry was instantaneous and legendary. They weren't just acting. They were reacting to one another in a way that felt like magic. This partnership gave birth to The Odd Couple in 1968, a film that would define both of their lives forever. Felix Ungar and Oscar Madison became cultural icons representing the two sides of every friendship. To the public, Jack and Walter were inseparable, a duo of pure joy and laughter. But as we listen to the laughter from those classic scenes, we must remember the note that was waiting at the end of this long journey. Even during these years of massive success, Jack was carefully guarding a part of himself that he didn't even show to Walter. He felt a profound obligation to be the happy one, the professional who never had a bad day. He believed that the audience, and perhaps even his best friend, loved the character of Jack Lemmon more than the man himself. This was the beginning of the silent burden he carried through every red carpet and every standing ovation. He was terrified that if he ever stopped being on, the world would turn away. By the 1970s, Jack had reached a level of fame that was almost overwhelming. He won his second Academy Award, this time for Best Actor in Save the Tiger in 1973, proving he was just as capable of heavy drama as he was of comedy. He was the first actor to win Oscars in both lead and supporting categories, a testament to his incredible range. Yet, the more awards he won, the more he felt like he was living a double life. In his final note, he admitted that during these peak years, he often felt like a fraud. He was playing the role of the successful legend, while privately struggling with a sense of emptiness that no amount of applause could fill. Walter Matthau was his anchor during these decades. They worked together on multiple films, including the later hits like Buddy Buddy and the Grumpy Old Men series in the 1990s. Their friendship was the one constant in a town that is famous for being fickle. They shared meals, they shared stories about their families, and they shared the unique isolation of being at the very top of the industry. To the fans, they were the ultimate odd couple who had made it through the decades together. But as Jack's final confession reveals, there were things he was still too afraid to say to Walter's face. Every time Walter made a joke about his own flaws, Jack would respond with a smile, hiding his own growing fears behind a mask of professional perfection. We must keep this in mind as we watch them bicker and laugh on the screen. The note Jack left behind wasn't about a lack of love for Walter. It was about a lack of courage to be vulnerable. He spent these golden years performing not just for the cameras, but for his best friend. He was convinced that he had to be the steady, reliable partner, never realizing that Walter would have loved him just as much without the act. As we move closer to the final years, the cracks in the mask began to show, and the secret Jack was keeping would eventually become too heavy to hold. The laughter was real, but so was the loneliness that Jack kept hidden in the shadows of his great success. By the time the 1980s and 1990s arrived, the energetic everyman that the public loved was facing a reality that he refused to share with the world. Behind the scenes of the hit movies like Grumpy Old Men, Jack Lemmon was fighting a battle with his own body that was becoming increasingly difficult to hide. To the fans, he was still the jittery and high-strung actor who could move across a room with a restless energy that made everyone laugh. But that energy was becoming a physical marathon. that Jack had to force himself to perform every single day. He was living with chronic pain and a level of exhaustion that would have sidelined most people. Yet he insisted on being the first person on set and the last one to leave. He felt that if he showed any sign of weakness, he would be letting down the legacy he had worked so hard to build. It is during these difficult years that we start to see the true weight of the secret he was carrying. Jack had developed a private dependency on alcohol to numb the physical pain and the growing anxiety that came with aging in a town like Hollywood. While Walter Matthau was always open about his health scares and his gambling debts, Jack felt he had to remain the golden boy of the duo. He couldn't bring himself to tell his best friend that he was struggling to keep his head above water. There were days on the set of their final films where Jack's hands would shake when the cameras weren't rolling. But the moment the director yelled action, he would snap back into the persona of the grumpy yet lovable neighbor. He was an architect of his own isolation, building a fortress of professional success to hide a growing internal crisis. As we watch those legendary scenes of Jack and Walter bickering in the snow, it is heartbreaking to realize that Jack was often in agony while making us laugh. He had been secretly diagnosed with bladder cancer, a battle he fought with the same intense secrecy that defined his entire life. He underwent treatments in private, often returning to work just days after a procedure, never letting the odd couple dynamic falter. Walter began to sense that something was wrong. He noticed the weight loss and the momentary lapses in Jack's legendary focus. But every time Walter tried to bridge the gap and ask what was truly happening, Jack would use his humor as a shield. He would deflect with a joke about Walter's bad luck at the horse track or a story from their early days in New York. This is the point where we must remember why that final note was so important. Jack was trapped by his own reputation for being the professional and the kind gentleman. He didn't want Walter to look at him with pity, and he certainly didn't want to be a burden to the man who was his closest companion. He believed that his value lay entirely in his ability to entertain and to be the dependable partner. This internal conflict created a profound sense of loneliness. Jack was surrounded by millions of fans and a loving family. Yet, he felt utterly alone in his suffering. He realized that if he passed away without speaking the truth, his friendship with Walter would remain incomplete. He was waiting for the right moment to be honest. But as the health of both men began to fail, time was running out. The physical cost of being Jack Lemmon had become a debt that he could no longer pay, and the silence between the two friends was growing heavier. Even as they shared their final moments of screen time together, Jack was already thinking about the words he would eventually write down. He knew that the mask was starting to slip, and he wanted to make sure that Walter eventually knew the man behind the performance. The tragedy was that even in their deepest moments of friendship, Jack was still playing a part, hoping that the truth in his heart would one day be enough to bridge the gap he had created. By the summer of the year 2000, the legendary partnership faced its most devastating challenge. Walter Matthau, the man who had been Jack's anchor for over half a century, was dying. As Walter lay in his hospital bed, Jack was there every single day. He sat by the bedside of his partner, watching the light fade from the eyes of the one person who truly understood the rhythms of his life. The public saw a grieving friend, but the reality was far more complex and painful. Jack was also dying. He was secretly battling a terminal stage of cancer while trying to comfort Walter. He was essentially performing the most difficult role of his career, pretending to be the strong one while his own body was failing him from within. When Walter finally passed away in July of 2000, a part of Jack died with him. The world mourned the loss of a comedy giant. But Jack mourned the loss of his mirror. In the lonely year that followed Walter's death, Jack's health spiraled rapidly. He became a recluse in his final months. retreating into the memories of a life spent in the spotlight. It was during this period of isolation that he decided the truth could no longer be a secret. He began to write. He wrote to his family, and he wrote a final, private note intended for the eyes of the man who was already gone, but whose spirit still dominated Jack's world. This note was eventually discovered by those closest to the duo, and it was a confession that stripped away the everyman persona once and for all. It revealed a side of Jack that was much darker than anyone ever suspected. In this message, Jack admitted the factor that made his life worse than anyone thought. He confessed that he had spent decades living in a state of performance-induced terror. He admitted to Walter that his famous jittery energy and his constant humor were not just acting choices, but a desperate defense mechanism against a lifelong, paralyzing clinical depression. He revealed that he had used alcohol not just as a social lubricant, but as a medication to stop what he called the shaking of the soul. This shaking occurred every time he stepped off a movie set, and the applause stopped. He told Walter that there were times during the filming of their greatest hits when he felt like a complete fraud, a man who was empty on the inside while the world laughed at his outer shell. Most poignantly, Jack confessed why he had never told Walter the truth while they were still together. He admitted that he was terrified that Walter, with his blunt and honest nature, would see through the mask and realize that Jack wasn't the nice guy everyone loved, but a man who was deeply broken and fearful. He spent 50 years worrying that his best friend's love was conditional on Jack being on and entertaining. The note was a heartbreaking apology for not trusting their friendship enough to be vulnerable. It was a revelation that the most relatable man in Hollywood felt like he was the only person on earth who didn't truly belong. We must pause and consider the weight of this honesty. Jack was finally speaking the words he had suppressed through decades of fame. He was admitting that his greatest fear was being known for who he actually was. As we approach the final chapter of his story, it becomes clear that the note was his way of finally being free. He wanted Walter to know that beneath the laughter and the awards, there was a man who just wanted to be accepted without the performance. This was the true legacy of their friendship, a bond so strong that it finally forced the truth into the light, even if it was only after the final curtain had fallen. On June 27, 2001, just 1 year after his dear friend Walter passed away, Jack Lemmon finally joined him. The two legends were buried in the Kung Cemetery Westwood Village Memorial Park, just a few yards apart. In the end, even in death, they remained the odd couple resting side by side in a final act of companionship. But as we look back from the vantage point of 2026, the note Jack left behind takes on a meaning that is far more profound than just a celebrity secret. It serves as a mirror for our own modern world. In this current era, we are more obsessed than ever with the public mask. Through social media and the constant pressure to curate a perfect life, we have all become small versions of Jack Lemmon, terrified to show the world the jittery reality of our true selves. We live in a time where vulnerability is often talked about, but rarely practiced, with the raw honesty Jack displayed in his final confession. His story is a devastating reminder that a life built on the approval of others is a life lived in a gilded cage. The tragedy of Jack's life was not just his depression or his private struggles. It was the reality of a 50-year friendship where the most important truths were saved for a piece of paper after the laughter had stopped. Jack's note teaches us that the greatest cost of fame and the greatest cost of our modern digital lives is the isolation of being loved for who we pretend to be rather than who we actually are. As we navigate the complexities of 2026, where the line between reality and performance is thinner than ever, Jack Lemmon's final words to Walter Matthau resonate with a haunting clarity. He was a man who had everything the world tells us to want: wealth, fame, talent, and the perfect best friend. Yet he died wishing he had been brave enough to be seen in his brokenness. He reminds us that integrity is not the absence of struggle, but the courage to share that struggle with the people who matter most. We should not wait until the final curtain is falling to be honest with the people we love. The legacy of Jack Lemmon is no longer just about the Oscars or the iconic movie scenes that defined a generation. It is about the silence he finally broke. When we watch The Odd Couple today, we should not just laugh at the bickering of two old friends. We should look at the two men on the screen and realize that even the strongest bonds require the light of truth to truly survive. Jack Lemmon gave the world a lifetime of joy, but his final gift was the most honest performance he ever gave. It was a letter that told us it is okay to be tired, it is okay to be afraid, and it is never too late to tell your best friend the truth. In the end, Jack and Walter are finally at peace, free from the cameras, the scripts, and the masks that fame forced upon them. The note remains as a testament to a friendship that was legendary but also deeply human. It is a story that began with a joke and ended with a confession, leaving us to wonder what secrets we are carrying and who we are waiting to tell. Because if Jack Lemmon taught us anything, it is that the most important lines are not the ones written for the screen, but the ones written from the heart.